Can you understand that? Because I can't. But we're going to learn how to do it together. I'm going to teach you how to memorize or learn Morse code in this video. Let's do it. So the story goes that Samuel Morse was away from his wife and got a letter saying that she was very sick. He immediately went home, which took him a lot of time, and by the time he got home, he found out that she had actually already passed away and was even buried. Can you imagine? So he became dead set on figuring out how to make communication a lot quicker, and subsequently came up with Morse code.
Here we go!
What we're gonna do in this video is figure out how to get it in our heads. I'm gonna teach you two ways, and I'm gonna learn it at the same time. One way is just kind of the quick and dirty way. It's not going to take very much time. And what it'll do is it'll put enough information in your head so that you, along with a piece of paper, can write out basically the Morse code chart. And from there, you could listen to Morse code or write it. So you would have the chart in your head. Now that's great for that specific purpose. But if you heard Morse code randomly in a restaurant or on an airplane or wherever you are, you would have to quickly jot out this chart and figure it out. Chances are you probably can't do that. So the second version of memorizing Morse code will be how to actually memorize what the sounds are for each letter, so that if you ever hear Morse code, beep, 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 you can actually translate it as it's happening to you, which would be pretty cool. So the very basics of Morse code is that it's made up of dots and dashes. Dot and a dash. Now, different combinations of the dots and the dashes will produce different letters, and then different combinations of those letters will obviously create words. And then combination of words will create sentences, combination of sentences will create paragraphs. When you're beeping out each letter, dots take up one beat, and then dashes take up 3 of those beats. Now, the reason that tempo matters is because obviously when you get to different words, you want to have some kind of spacing between it. Space between 2 letters in a word would be 3 lengths or 3 beats, and then between words would be 7. Okay, so that way you can build words and you know where one letter starts, one word starts, etc. We won't worry about that for now. Let's get to the basics of how to memorize the simplest form of the Morse code so that you can write it out and then do it by ear. All right, so our first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna learn some really weird story. And it goes like this. I want you to picture that there is an ET, an extraterrestrial, and his name happens to be Ian.
Hey, Ian.
I-A-N, that's his name. It's just a regular name, Ian. And Ian, suddenly he's very open-minded. He says, sure. And what's gonna happen is he gets some WD-40, and before he does something with it, he says to himself out loud, K, go. Like, okay, I'm ready, go. For some reason, he uses that oil to turn on some high voltage frequency. I don't know what that means, but just imagine that somehow with the WD-40, he has some high voltage frequency suddenly coursing through his veins. He pauses for a second and says to himself, LOL. It was a funny experience. As an extraterrestrial, whatever. Once that's all done, he puts on his PJs, gets ready for bed, gets inside of a box, because that's where apparently ETs sleep. And the box happens to be size Q, because Q is the size of all boxes in this extraterrestrial planet.
Duh.
That's it. So what we've actually memorized there is just the alphabet in a certain order. Their frequency in the English language, more or less. It's actually not quite correct, but it's close enough. So if we write out what we have E-T, right, E-T. His name was Ian, right? Then he said, sure, M-S-U-R. Then he gets the WD-40, W-D, and says K, go, K, go. Then he turns on the high voltage frequency, pauses, right, I'll put a space here, laughs to himself, LOL, that's just an L. And then another pause, he puts on his PJs, gets in a box, BX, and then it's size Q. Here's a little bit of a stretch, but C-Y-Z. So C-Y-Z, and then Q. The way it works is actually there's a binary tree that can be drawn. If I have my letters here, you start at the top, I'll put a little circle here. That's where you start, and you branch out. At every node, you branch out. So to the left and to the right, I'm gonna read from left to right the alphabet that I just wrote down here. So the first one will be E. then T. And those happen to be the most frequent letters in the English alphabet. Then we branch each of those down further into 2. And my next 2 letters are I and A. And then we have N and M, just going across from left to right. We continue down, breaking those into further things. I'm running out of room here, but I'll show you the actual chart in a little bit. So after M was S, U, R, W, D, K, G, O. And so on and so on. I'll let you guys finish that. I'll show the graphic in a second so you can follow along completely. So if you go down the branches to the left, that's a dot. And going right down a branch is a dash. And you can literally read out what each letter is if you follow this track and say to yourself, okay, if I'm going left, that's a dot. If I'm going right, that's a dash. And then you just compile them all together to create the letter. If I go to the left for the E, that's just a dot. And that is the Morse code for E, dot. And then if I go to the right for T, it's a dash. Now let's say we want to get to S. Now what am I going to do? I'm going to follow my branches here. I go down the E, that's a dot. I go down the I, that's another left move, that's another dot. And then I go another left branch move, that's another dot. So S happens to be dot, dot, dot. Let's say I want to go to O. I would go down to T, that's a dash. Okay, so I have a dash so far. I go down to M. Again, that's to the right, that's another dash. And then I go to O, that's another dash. So O is actually dash, dash, dash. So now if we look at this chart for there's one more layer, I didn't draw it out here, but you can see it in the chart. You see H, V, F from the leftmost, and then there's a space. Remember I told you there was a space? The L sits there alone as the left part of R. Then we have P, J, B, X, C, Y, Z, Q. It just goes all the way across. And then of course the last 2 under O, there's no more letters of the alphabet. But let's say we want to figure out what B is, right? Which is pretty deep down the tree. So I go to the right to get to T, that's a dash. I go to the left to get to N, that's a dot. I see that I have to go down to D and B, which are both dots. So B is actually dash, dot, dot, dot. Cool. So the next step, we're gonna memorize what each letter actually sounds like. People who are very proficient in Morse code have suggested that you should not learn what it looks like as a mnemonic. So, because my first instinct was, okay, maybe I'll look at what each letter looks like as dots and dashes, and I'll think of a picture, something that it looks like. But apparently that's really tough, and once you learn it that way, it's actually hard to translate it to audio. So the suggestions I've read are to turn it immediately into some sound, and then that will always help you remember when you hear the sound, which is ultimately what you want to be able to do. So for the way this works is for every letter in the alphabet, we're basically gonna have a little phrase, okay, that has some kind of stress on syllables that will help you remember a dot versus a dash. Remember, a dot is very quick and a dash is a bit longer, more stressed upon. So the word that we're going to come up with, or the phrase, it's going to have a similar structure as the dots and dashes of the actual letter itself. So let's start with our first example here, the letter A. Now, if I just remember the word apart, the way I stress it in my head is apart. The A is short, the part is long. We have a dot and a dash. Apart. And some of these are totally weird. Hopefully they're weird enough that you can remember them. So B is going to be Bob is the man. Bob is the man. Bob is the man. Bob is the man. Bob is the man is dash, dot, dot, dot. Bob is the man. Now, it's important when you learn these, as I'm saying them, is to hear them as I stress them, because that's going to help you remember them. Bob is the man. Bob is the man. Bob is the man. Beep, dot, dot, dot. Let's move on to C. This one's easy. I just think of Coca-Cola, but I pronounce it like this. Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola. The way Morse code is for C is dash, dot, dash, dot. D is dog did it. Dog did it. The dog did it, right? Whatever the dog did, he did it. So dog did it, which is dash, dot, dot. Let's move on. I'll do a few more of these and then we'll kind of go through it a little quicker. You can spend your time learning those and practicing vocalizing it with those stressed syllables, right? So you know what it's supposed to sound like, what it will be like in dots and dashes. Okay, so E, this is my favorite one and the easiest to learn. You may not even need this since we know, if you remember from the chart, that it's at the very top of our tree, it's just a dot. The way I remember it is I just remember like someone questioning, very quick, it's just a dot, That's easy. All right, so for F, fetch a fireman. Fetch a fireman. Can you guess what that is? Dot, dot, dash, dot. Fetch a fireman. dot, dot, dash, dot. And remember, when you come up with these little weird stories, try to actually visualize what you're saying. Fetching a fireman, what does that even mean? Are you fetching an actual globule of flame and bringing it somewhere? Are you fetching a fireman, like an actual dude firefighter, right? Are you carrying him over your shoulder? All right, so G, this is one of my favorite ones just because it sounds fun, is good gravy. Good gravy. Dash, dash, dot. Good gravy. Just think of your Thanksgiving, your grandma's delicious good gravy. And as you're drinking that gravy or you've poured it all over your turkey, you say good gravy. Just like that. All right, so the letter H, continuing on, is really easy. It's hippity hop. Everything is short, quick syllables, so that's just 1, 2, 3, 4 little dots. Hippity hop. So for I can remember I bid, like I bid on that thing on eBay that I wanted so much. I bid. Those are just 2 quick dots. I bid. Okay, J, I'm gonna think of the Jaws movie, and the phrase is in Jaws, Jaws, Jaws. So it's a dot, dash, dash, dash. In Jaws, Jaws, Jaws. Okay, K is a good one. Kangaroo. Kangaroo. L is Los Angeles. Los Angeles. M you can just remember is dash, dash. So something really delicious twice. N you could remember as nudist. Dash, dot. Nudist. O you can remember as oh my God. 3 long dashes. This is a fun one. P is a poopy smell. Dot, dash, dash, dot. A poopy smell. Q is God save the Queen. Dash, dash, dot, dash. God save the Queen. R, you can remember something rotating. Rotation, rotation, rotation. S, we said before, is going to be dot, dot, dot. And the way you can remember that is just think of some really Spanish person saying si, si, si. For T, we have just a dash. Remember, it was at the top of our tree here, just a single dash. You can just remember it with a single long stress word that is starting with T, like tall. All right, for U, you can use the word uniform and say it like this, uniform, uniform. So dot, dot, dash, uniform. For this one, it's victory V. Quick 3 dots and a dash. Victory V. Dot, 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 dash. Victory V. There you go. W, I think of World War, so you could say the World War. The World War. The World War. And so for X, we have X marks the spot. X marks the spot. Y, you're a cool dude. You're a cool dude. And finally, we have Z. This one's a bit weird, but zinc zookeeper. Dash, dash, dot, dot. There you go.
Nice.
So there you have it. You now have this lovely piece of paper committed to memory based on what you heard me say weirdly. So now let's see if you can actually understand what was being beeped out at the beginning of this video. I'll play it very slow at 5 words per minute. M, E, M, O, R, Y. Memory.
What happened?
I think he's talking, just not with words.
Hey, what is that?
Morse code.
H-E-R-E.
Here. Sweet!
That's the end of this video. I hope this was super helpful. I'm going to give you one last message as I say my goodbyes here. I'm out. Subscribe. Oh yeah, like the video, all the things. Comment in the description with a Morse code message so that nobody can see it except you and I guess everybody else who knows Morse code. I'm out.